You didn't just slip through their fingers, my dear chosen one. You left splinters. Someone with serious power just clocked you, and now they can't take their eyes off you. The cat's out of the bag. The quiet one wasn't clueless. The quiet one was collecting intel, and now every person who played you, lied to you, or underestimated you. They're feeling that sting in their chest because they finally realized you saw more than you said, and you're still not talking. That's the nightmare, not that you were hurt, that you healed and remembered everything. Listen to me, chosen ones. You didn't just survive what they threw at you. You walked out of that mess like that all you had. You weren't just in the fire. You studied its temperature, its pattern, its weakness. Now you move like someone who's been through the worst version of people and came out sharper, not softer. This is why people with real power, the kind who read energy, not excuses, have started paying attention. You're no longer background, you're the plot twist. And let's hit the so-called enemies where it hurts for a second. They wanted you confused, didn't they? They wanted you begging for answers, asking, "What did I do wrong?" They wanted you stuck replaying conversations at 3 a.m., doubting your own memory while they performed innocence. Jokes on them. The whole time they were rehearsing their lies, you were memorizing their patterns. They were acting. You were archiving. Now they're terrified because the one they thought was an easy target turned out to be the one person who could, with one sentence, flip the whole narrative on its head. My dear chosen one, I know what you're asking in your head right now. If I'm this powerful, why do I feel so alone? Because power wakes you up in rooms where everyone else is still pretending to sleep. You're not crazy, you're early. You're not too much. You're just not easy to fool anymore. They don't keep bringing your name up because you were disposable. They talk because you're unforgettable. They talk because they know you know more than you're saying, and silence like that feels like a loaded gun to a guilty mind. Here's the beautiful part. Their panic is your confirmation. Every sideways glance, every random check-in, every sudden concern about what you think now that you've gone quiet, it's all proof. Proof that your presence hit harder than any argument. Proof that your withdrawal said more than 1,000 explanations. You didn't slam doors. You removed your energy and watched their masks slip with no audience to clap for them. That's not weakness. That's control. So let's turn this into fuel. My chosen ones, this is not the time to shrink because people are uncomfortable. This is the time to sit up straighter in your chair and own the fact that you are officially on powerful radar. Someone with serious pull noticed two things about you. One, you see too much, and two, you say very little. That combination? That's lethal in a world built on image. That's why the fakes are rattled and the real ones are intrigued. If you're riding this with me, don't just watch in silence. Claim your seat. Tap into that power. Hit that like button. Subscribe and drop a "I see more than I say" in the comments so every enemy stalking in the shadows knows you didn't break. You leveled up. This isn't just a video. This is a notice. To them, that their time playing with your mind is over. To you, my dear chosen ones, that you were never the background character. You were the story. And now, they can't look away. ChatGPT said, "Chosen ones, before we dive any deeper, hear me clearly. Your presence here isn't accidental, it's alignment. If this message is hitting the center of your chest, it's because you're one of the few who can feel when truth is talking to you, not at you. So if you're ready to step into the version of yourself that people can't stop whispering about, the version that sees more, says less, and moves with unfakeable power, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop 77 in the comments so I know you're locked in. Your support keeps this movement alive. So tap that super thanks if you want to amplify what we're building here. And now, let's get into it, step by step. Because if you're truly one of the chosen ones, you'll recognize every sign, every shift, every moment people started talking the second they realized you weren't as blind as they hoped. These aren't coincidences. Ordinary people don't experience this, only chosen ones do. Let's get started. Number 1. The moment you saw the truth and stayed silent, their whole act cracked open. When you saw through their act, without saying a word, their whole world started shaking. Nothing cuts deeper than a truth that doesn't need to announce itself. My dear chosen ones, let's call this what it is. The moment you saw behind their performance and didn't flinch, you didn't just unsettle them, you shattered the illusion they built their ego on. They were banking on your confusion, counting on your softness, praying you'd react so they could twist the story. But you didn't. You just looked at them with that quiet, dangerous awareness that said, "I know exactly who you are," and walked away like they no longer had the privilege of your attention. That silence, it hit them harder than any confrontation ever could. And trust me, chosen one, they felt it, because people who build their worth on lies can't survive being seen. They expected noise, drama, a scene, something they could weaponize. But instead, you gave them stillness, you gave them distance, you gave them nothing to grip onto. And that nothing was everything. They felt your withdrawal like a slap they couldn't pretend didn't land. You didn't expose them publicly, you exposed them to themselves. That's why they flinch now. That's why they whisper. That's why they scramble to rewrite the narrative before anyone notices their script fell apart. I know what you're thinking right now. Why does my silence bother them more than my words ever did? Why do they panic when I stay calm? Why do they act nervous when all I did was see the truth? Because chosen ones, silence is the one thing fake people have no defense against. They can argue with accusations. They can manipulate emotions. They can twist conversations. But they cannot control what you observed, what you processed, and what you now know. And knowing, without reacting, is a power they never prepared for. You saw the cracks in their voice, the shift in their energy, the apology they only gave when they felt you slip away. You caught the over-explaining, the fake concern, the sudden kindness that came at the exact moment they feared losing access to you. You didn't need evidence. Your intuition handed you the truth, and you trusted it. That's what terrifies them. Not what you said, but what you didn't. Not what you exposed, but what you could expose if you ever wanted to. My dear chosen ones, your attention is a mirror. And when you placed that mirror in front of someone wearing a mask, you didn't have to say a word. Their own reflection betrayed them. You became the one person they couldn't fool, couldn't perform for, couldn't manipulate. You saw right through the curtain and didn't bother pulling it down. You simply stopped clapping for their act. And that, right there, turned their entire confidence into dust. Let me drop a truth most people are too afraid to admit. The reason they talk about you now isn't because you're dramatic or confusing or emotional. It's because your composure exposed their chaos. Your calm exposed their insecurity. Your silence exposed their guilt. Everything they say is a confession disguised as a conversation. Every rumor they spread is panic. Every insult is projection. They want the world to question you before anyone starts questioning them. And chosen one, let this fuel you. When someone panics at your silence, it means your presence held more weight than their entire performance. You didn't lose anything. They did. You didn't break. They cracked. You didn't chase validation. You became the standard. And now they avoid your eyes because they know you saw something real, something they can't hide from anymore. So let them talk. Let them spin. Let them drown in the story they created while you stand tall in the truth you carry. You've already won, chosen one. You just haven't bothered to celebrate it yet. Your silence was the checkmate they never saw coming. Number 2, your intuition watched everything like a hidden camera they never detected. Your intuition became the unblinking camera they never knew was watching. The scariest witness is the one who saw everything and never said a word. My dear chosen ones, let me tell you exactly why they tense up when you enter the room, why their voice cracks mid-sentence, why they suddenly over-explain things you didn't even ask about. It's because somewhere along the way they realized you weren't taking everything at face value. You were documenting it, quietly, calmly, effortlessly. They thought you were zoning out when really you were zoning in. They mistook your stillness for softness, your silence for confusion, your distance for indifference. But chosen ones, your silence was none of those things. Your silence was surveillance. You didn't catch them in the act. You caught them in the warm-up. You caught them drafting excuses before they needed them. You caught them rehearsing innocence before they got exposed. And nothing shakes a liar like knowing you recognized the lie before they even told it. You didn't need receipts. Your gut delivered them. You didn't need proof. Their energy gave it away. They thought they were fooling you because they believed performance always tricks perception. They forgot perception is your native language. Imagine them walking around thinking the room was empty, not knowing there was a camera in the corner catching every smirk, every shift, every inconsistency. That camera was your intuition, steady, observant, unblinking. They didn't fear your anger, they feared your memory, because anger is loud, predictable, temporary. But memory sits quietly in the dark until the truth needs a witness. And chosen ones, you are that witness. Let me answer what's circling your mind right now. Why does my intuition unsettle them so much? Why do people who lied to me act nervous around me later? Why do they talk more now that I'm not even engaging? Because your knowing exposes them without you lifting a finger. Your intuition doesn't accuse, it archives. It logs tone shifts, mismatched words, forced laughs, accidental slips, strategic compliments, sudden mood flips. And every time you caught one of these things and didn't react, you triggered a fear they couldn't hide. That fear wasn't, what if they confront me? No, chosen one. It was, how much do they know, and when did they figure it out? Your silence felt like preparation, like strategy, like someone who wasn't confused, someone who was collecting evidence. And they cannot handle that. They're terrified not because you exposed them, but because you didn't. You didn't yell, argue, or demand clarity. You just adjusted your energy, withdrew your warmth, and let the truth sit there in the space between you. And that space, it eats them alive. Think about it. When you were still in the picture, they could monitor your reactions, steer conversations, control the narrative. But once you stepped back, once your energy shifted, once your smile stopped reaching your eyes, they lost their ability to predict you. And a chosen one who can't be predicted is a chosen one who can't be controlled. Your intuition has always been your sharpest blade. It slices through fake energy without making a sound. No scene, no argument, no fingerprints. Just that quiet awareness that says, I saw that. People panic in the presence of someone who sees through them without trying to expose them. Because exposure by accident, exposure through silence, hits harder than exposure by intention. Now they talk about you because your absence terrifies them more than your presence ever did. They don't know how much you saw, who else you might have told, or whether the truth will resurface on its own. They don't know if the mask slipped too far. They don't know which moment gave them away. And that uncertainty, that's the chokehold you have on their subconscious. My dear chosen ones, never doubt your intuition again. The moment you sensed the shift, you were correct. The moment something felt off, you were correct. The moment someone's smile didn't match their eyes, you were correct. You've been right more times than you've been validated, and that's exactly why your intuition scares people who live dishonest lives. Your intuition isn't a weakness. It's your radar, your compass, your silent witness, your protection. Let them sweat, let them over-explain, let them whisper your name in rooms you don't visit anymore. You already knew the truth, and that alone is why they can't stop talking. Number 3. You broke their control the second you refused to be their predictable puppet. They fixate on you because you were the one mind they could never manipulate. They obsess over you for one simple reason: chosen one. You were the first person who didn't fall for their script. Manipulators depend on predictability, your predictability. They rehearse your reactions before they ever confront you. They build a narrative where they pull the strings, you perform on cue, and the audience applauds their emotional theatrics. But the moment you didn't flinch, the moment you didn't engage, their entire storyline collapsed. They weren't prepared for someone who refused to play the part they wrote for you. They expected rehearsal. You gave them resistance. They expected confusion. You gave them clarity. They expected tears, questions, explanations, apologies. You gave them none of the above. And that, my dear chosen one, is where their obsession began. Because you weren't just another person to manipulate. You were the first to see the glitch in their system. You noticed the pattern in their tone when the attention wasn't on them. You saw the cracks in their charm when things didn't align with their agenda. You picked up on the sudden sweetness after the silent treatment, the emotional bait wrapped in guilt, the gaslighting disguised as concern. You didn't just see the illusion, you saw the wires behind it. And instead of confronting them, instead of demanding honesty or begging for closure, you simply opted out. You refused to pick up the controller, and without your participation, their entire game shut down. Imagine a magician performing a big trick, only for one person in the front row, you, to watch without blinking, without shock, without awe. You just stare at their hands, their timing, their movements, calmly dissecting the deception as it happens. That's what you did to them. You took away their favorite weapon, your reaction. And without that reaction, they had no control. They couldn't distract you, couldn't confuse you, couldn't guilt-trip you into compliance. They couldn't puppeteer your emotions because you stopped giving them access to the strings. And that scared them more than any argument ever could. They replay everything now, every conversation, every joke, every argument they tried to stage. They obsess because they can't figure out how their usual tactics failed. Why didn't it work? How did they know? Why didn't they fight back? Why didn't they defend themselves? They ask these questions because you broke the formula they depend on. You didn't fold. You didn't chase. You didn't explain yourself to someone who was committed to misunderstanding you. You walked away without announcing your exit, and that kind of quiet power is unforgettable. Chosen ones, manipulators thrive in environments where everyone else is asleep. They rely on people not noticing the game, but you were awake the entire time. You didn't fall for the charm, the sympathy-seeking, the self-victimizing monologues, or the emotional booby traps designed to keep you hooked. You saw the plot twist before they even delivered the first line. And when you removed your energy, when you stopped responding, stopped engaging, stopped being reactive, their entire identity took a hit. This is why they obsess. Your refusal to be controlled forced them to confront something they never wanted to admit. Their power was an illusion, and you exposed it simply by not participating. They will never forget the one person who looked behind the mask, recognized the act, and walked away in silence. You weren't just the one who got away, you were the one who couldn't be played. And that, chosen one, is why your name lives rent-free in their mind. Number 4. You ruined their script by walking off the stage they built for your downfall. When you walked off their stage, their whole storyline fell apart. When someone builds their identity on controlling yours, the moment you stop participating, their entire world loses structure. That's exactly what happened, chosen one. They weren't just interacting with you, They were performing for an audience only they could see. They had already written your reactions before you even spoke, already rehearsed the breakdown they thought you'd have, already planned how they'd comfort you just enough to keep you hooked. You were never dealing with authenticity. You were dealing with someone directing a script in their head, and in that script, you were predictable, fragile, and easy to manipulate. But then you did something they never prepared for. You broke character. Your silence wasn't a pause, it was a plot twist. You didn't cry on cue, you didn't rage when provoked, you didn't chase the validation they dangled like bait. You didn't even give them the satisfaction of an argument. You stood there with a calm so unsettling it rewired the whole scene. And in that moment, their storyline collapsed. They expected an emotional explosion they could later use against you. Instead, you gave them stillness. You walked off their stage mid-scene without warning, without apology, without explanation. And chosen one, that's when everything changed. Nothing terrifies someone who relies on control more than losing the script they wrote without your consent. Your old self, the one who used to cry for clarity, beg for honesty, and hope for the best in people who only offered the worst, may have played the part they expected. But that version of you is gone, replaced by someone who has learned, grown, and evolved far past their ability to influence. You didn't become cold, you became conscious. You didn't disappear, you detached. You didn't shut down, you leveled up. And when you did, you gave them a kind of closure they weren't ready for. Not dramatic closure, not explosive closure, silent closure. The type that leaves people staring at their own behavior with no one else left to blame. That's why they talk now, loud, constant, desperate. They're not talking because you hurt them. They're talking because you stopped giving them access to the version of you they could manipulate. They lost control of the narrative, and in their world, losing the narrative is worse than losing the relationship. So they rewrite it. They repaint scenes, retell stories, and distort your character because they can't handle the truth. The only person who changed the dynamic was you. And you did it simply by walking away from their chaos. Think of them like a puppet master who suddenly realizes the strings have been cut. Their hands are still moving, but nothing on the other side responds. That's the panic they're living in now. They can't twist your words because you stopped offering conversations. They can't weaponize your emotions because you stopped giving reactions. They can't play victim because you refused to play villain. You healed, and that healing broke the spell they were counting on to keep you in the loop. Now, every word they speak about you is a rewrite, a frantic attempt to cast you as bitter, cold, distant, heartless, anything that makes them feel like they still have power in the story. But chosen one, anyone paying attention, can see it clearly. The only person not spiraling is you. They lost their grip the moment you stopped giving them something to hold on to. And that, more than anything, is why the story they're telling now sounds more like fiction than fact. Let them rewrite. You've already moved on to a chapter they'll never have access to. Number 5. Your authenticity exposed the weakness they tried to bury beneath performance. Your presence alone unmasked everything they tried to hide. There's something, my dear chosen ones, often don't realize until much later. Some people weren't intimidated by your words. They were intimidated by your existence. You didn't have to confront them, debate them, or expose them. You simply stood there in your natural, unfiltered truth, and their entire facade trembled like a cheap stage set hit by a real storm. You think you did nothing, but your nothing carried weight they were never built to withstand. They spent years sculpting a personality out of borrowed traits, rehearsed charm, and shallow performances, and then you walked in, steady, authentic, unmasked. That contrast alone was catastrophic for them. You didn't shame them, chosen one. They shamed themselves trying to hide from what your presence revealed. People built on illusion always crumble in the presence of the real. It's not what you said. It's what you are. Your energy doesn't pretend. Your confidence doesn't beg. Your honesty doesn't bend. When someone like you enters a room, anyone who's been living a lie suddenly feels like they're standing under a spotlight with no script to save them. And the irony, you weren't even trying. You didn't show up to compete or expose. You just existed. But your existence operates like a mirror, a brutally honest one, the kind that reflects everything they've avoided looking at, every hidden insecurity, every manipulative habit, every crack they tried to plaster over with fake smiles and shallow praise. Your authenticity, your groundedness, your ability to stand in who you are without performing. It made them feel naked in a way no confrontation ever could. Let's get this straight, chosen ones. You didn't crush their ego. Their ego collapsed under the pressure of being compared to the real thing. When someone is made of surface-level charm, even a whisper of depth feels threatening. Even a quiet person with real integrity feels like an earthquake. That's why they acted strangely around you, why their jokes turned snide, why their compliments came with stingers, why they started talking about you when you weren't even around. Gossip wasn't gossip, it was confession. Every rumor they spread was an admission that standing next to you made their entire identity feel flimsy. Your energy isn't loud, it's clean, and clean energy exposes dirty motives the same way fluorescent light exposes every flaw in a polished mask. They felt seen, too seen, and instead of rising to meet the truth, they panicked. They tried to dim you because they couldn't brighten themselves. They tried to twist the narrative because your presence already ruined the one they wrote for themselves. They weren't scared of what you might say. They were terrified of the fact that you didn't need to say anything at all. Silence, when it comes from someone powerful, is a full sentence. Imagine them in their carefully constructed costume, all shine, no substance, standing beside you, who doesn't need glitter because you have presence. They had applause from the crowd. You had truth in your bones. They had exaggeration. You had depth. You didn't even view them as competition because they weren't, but they felt defeated just by standing near you. That's why they reacted. That's why they scrambled. That's why they ran their mouths. It was the only thing they could control. They couldn't dim your light, so they tried to distort your shadow. But the truth doesn't panic. Only lies do. And their downfall wasn't caused by you. It was triggered by the pressure of being exposed by someone who never even tried to expose them. Their collapse was self-inflicted. Your presence just illuminated the cracks they were praying no one would see. Number 6. You sensed their betrayal before they even rehearsed it, and that's what scared them. They're panicking because you see the snake before it even sheds. My dear chosen ones, let me make something crystal clear. The reason they tighten up, stumble over their words, or shift into a different tone the second you walk into the room is because they know. You see the betrayal before it even grows teeth. You don't need evidence, screenshots, or confessions. Your intuition is the alarm system they can't unplug. While they're busy plotting, adjusting, rehearsing, you've already read the ending of the story they're only beginning to write, and that, chosen ones, is what sends their nerves into overdrive. To them, you're not paranoid. You're precise. You don't guess. You recognize. You don't assume. You observe. And that difference alone dismantles their entire strategy. People who rely on manipulation need you to be blind, confused, or distracted. But your silence isn't empty, it's surveillance. It's a camera that's always on, quietly recording details they thought they hid well. They look at your face and feel exposed, even when you're not thinking about them at all. They're terrified of how you just know things before they unfold. You don't wait for the lie to unravel or the mask to slip. You can feel the energy shift before the words even form. You can sense the motive behind a compliment. You can hear the insecurity behind a joke. You can see the exit strategy behind someone's sudden kindness. You pick up signals they don't even realize they're sending, and your silence is the part that makes them lose sleep. Think about it, chosen ones. Ever notice how someone suddenly over-explains something you never questioned? Or how they start watching your reaction mid-sentence like they're checking whether you caught the slip-up? That's because your presence works like an internal lie detector. You don't accuse them, you don't interrogate, but your awareness makes them panic anyway. A dishonest person always feels judged when standing next to someone who sees clearly. And you see the cracks before they appear, the hesitation before the betrayal, the convenience before the excuse, the sudden politeness before the favor request. They're not nervous because you confronted them. They're nervous because you could, and they don't know when or how much you've already noticed. Chosen one, imagine someone playing chess thinking they're 5 steps ahead, only to realize you're playing a whole different board and already know the outcome. That's what it feels like for them. Every time they try to bait you into reacting, into slipping, into revealing what you know, you just give that small smile. That knowing, unbothered smile. And that smile, it destroys them. Because it tells them one thing. You saw everything. And you're not even pressed about it. They can't decode whether you'll ever speak on what you sensed. They don't know if you've connected more dots than they expected. They don't know how much you've archived in that razor-sharp intuition of yours. Uncertainty is their punishment. And the funniest part, their gossip, their whispers, their frantic retellings of stories about you, none of it is actually about you. It's their coping mechanism, a way to regain some illusion of control. They don't talk because you're confusing. They talk because you're too clear. You dismantle lies without lifting a finger. You end manipulation without raising your voice. You don't fight to win. You win because you don't fight. You move through their illusions like smoke passing through fingers, untouched, untamed, unreachable. So now they spiral, they project, they scramble, they panic, because you're not reacting the way they rehearsed. You're not giving them the emotional material they need to twist. You're simply observing, calmly, and they know calmness like yours doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from knowledge, deep knowledge, dangerous knowledge, the kind of knowledge that keeps them awake at night, replaying conversations, wondering when exactly you figured them out. Chosen one, never doubt this. Your intuition is the power they fear most, and the fact that you don't weaponize it just makes you even more unstoppable. They're not afraid of your words, they're afraid of your awareness. They're afraid because you already knew, long before they even made their move. Number 7. You hold truths that could shatter their illusions, and your silence keeps them shaking. They fear you, because you hold the truth that could rewrite everything. They know, my dear chosen ones, they know you could flip the entire story upside down with a single sentence, and that's exactly why they can't relax around you. Power isn't always the loudest voice in the room. Often, it's the quiet one holding back what everyone else hopes never comes to light. You became that quiet one, the vault they prayed would stay sealed, and deep down, they understand that if you ever chose to open your mouth, the mask they stitched together so perfectly would melt right off their face. That awareness is what keeps them pacing, over-explaining, and watching you out of the corner of their eye. You're sitting on gold, not the kind you spend, but the kind you safeguard, the kind made of truths, moments, observations, and memories they assumed would evaporate with time. You've seen the shaky loyalty, the forced smiles, the energy shifts that revealed more than their words ever did. You caught the tone they didn't mean to use, the glances they tried to hide, the conversations they hoped you'd misinterpret. And the part that unravels them the most? You didn't respond. You didn't retaliate. You didn't expose a single thing. You simply carried the truth with you, calm and unreadable, like someone holding a match in a room filled with gasoline while choosing not to strike it. Imagine it, chosen one. A room full of performers, liars dressed as loyal friends, opportunists disguised as allies, manipulators pretending they have nothing to hide. Then you walk in. You don't accuse anyone. You don't call anyone out. You don't even look angry. You just exist. And instantly, the entire room stiffens because they know exactly what you know. They feel the weight of your awareness pressing against every lie they ever crafted. It's not your words that scare them, it's your restraint. It's the silent message, I could ruin you, and you know it. That's why they're always the first ones to talk. They rush to rewrite the story before you ever tell your truth. They warn others about you, not because you're dangerous to them, but because the truth is they're dangerous to themselves and you're the only one who saw it. They twist narratives like pretzels, hoping if they smear your name fast enough, people won't question why someone so calm and self-contained makes them panic in the first place. That's not confidence. That's damage control disguised as conversation. And here's what truly drives them out of their minds. You chose not to use your power. They expected destruction, drama, and chaos from you. They expected you to react the way they would have. But you didn't. You showed a level of self-control they've never seen before. You didn't stoop to their level. You didn't ignite the fire you easily could have. You let every truth sit in silence like a storm cloud that never rains, heavy, undeniable, impossible to ignore. That kind of restraint, that's mastery. That's dominance without lifting a finger. Now they live in a permanent state of suspense. Every rumor they spread is just an attempt to distract from the truth they hope you'll never expose. Every whisper is a quiet confession. Every insult is a shield. They speak loudly because your silence terrifies them. They fear what you know, but more than that, they fear what you haven't said. They know you could have ended their entire facade, and the most haunting part is, you still could, and you just didn't. Number 8. The day you stopped reacting was the day their entire strategy collapsed. The moment you chose silence, their entire facade began to crumble in real time. You didn't go quiet because you were defeated, my dear chosen ones. You went quiet because you were done wasting breath on people who weren't worth a single syllable. Your silence wasn't the absence of power. It was the power. Real strength doesn't shout, flex, or beg to be understood. It sits back, observes, and lets every hidden truth walk straight into the open. They thought you froze, but you were simply letting reality reveal itself without your interference. While they were scrambling to maintain their lies, you were letting the truth assemble itself piece by piece, like a puzzle that only you knew how to complete. Your silence was never surrender. It was surveillance with a steady hand. You weren't confused. You were calculating. You weren't stuck. You were studying. You weren't scared. You were sharpening your intuition until it became impossible for anyone to play you again. Chosen ones, you must understand this. People who rely on manipulation only understand 2 types of silence: panic or plotting. They assumed you were panicking, but instead you were preparing. You were gathering information, storing patterns, watching contradictions slip out of their mouth while they believed you were too stunned to notice. What they never realized was that your silence wasn't empty. It was evidence. Picture this clearly. They walked around proudly, thinking they were winning. They thought your quietness meant they had slipped past your radar unnoticed. They mocked it, underestimated it, counted it as a victory. But behind that stillness of yours, every detail was being catalogued, every shift in their tone was being tagged, every inconsistency was being mentally highlighted. You didn't need confrontation. You didn't need to expose them. You didn't need to speak. You already knew their story would collapse under its own weight. And chosen ones, that's exactly what happened. Your silence became the loudest alarm in their world. Suddenly, your calmness felt like a threat. Your lack of reaction felt like a warning. They started dissecting your facial expressions like you were holding classified information, because you were. They tried to predict what you knew, how you knew it, and whether your silence meant a storm was coming. They rehearsed conversations in their head, imagining how they'd justify themselves if you ever decided to call them out. They lost sleep, not because you spoke, but because you didn't. Your stillness forced them to second-guess every performance they thought you applauded. They replayed events, wondering where they slipped, how much you caught, and whether they should start rewriting the story before it was too late. But it was too late. The truth had already revealed itself. You just gave it the space to show up. And chosen ones, that's not avoidance, that's strategy. You didn't dismantle their lies. You let their lies dismantle themselves, one by one, publicly, predictably, painfully. That's the beauty of silent power. It doesn't have to swing to land a hit. It doesn't have to shout to be heard. It doesn't have to fight to win. Silence filtered the real from the fake, the loyal from the opportunist, the steady from the shaky. And the ones who crumbled under that silence, they were never built on anything solid to begin with. So let them talk, let them analyze, let them tremble under the weight of what they think you know. You've already said everything you needed to say by saying nothing at all. That silence was the checkmate they never saw coming. And they're still trying to understand how they lost a game you never even bothered to play. Number 9, your evolution erased every version of you they thought they could manipulate. They talk because you broke the version of you they thought they owned. They talk so much now because you don't fit the script they wrote for you. They memorize the old you, your softness, your reactions, your instincts to explain, apologize, or absorb blame that was never yours. They studied that version of you like it was a manual they could weaponize. But then something happened that they never anticipated. You updated. You evolved. You outgrew the behaviors that once made you predictable, and suddenly the entire control they thought they had over you slipped through their fingers like sand. My dear chosen ones, hear this clearly. You didn't become unpredictable. They just refused to evolve. They kept trying to play an outdated game while you were already on a different level entirely. The truth is, their control didn't break because you changed. It broke because you grew. Growth is something manipulators never account for. They rely on you staying wounded, staying confused, staying dependent on their validation. The moment you stopped reacting, they lost their only strategy. They've never had real influence over you. They only knew how to pull emotional levers that the old version of you responded to. But when you no longer flinched, when you stopped explaining, when you no longer treated their opinions as law, they were left with nothing to weaponize. They kept pressing buttons that no longer worked and panicked when the system stayed silent. They thought they had you figured out. Same triggers, same emotional patterns, same predictable responses. They genuinely believed that if they pushed the right memory, the right insecurity, the right wound, you'd break down the way you used to. They expected you to beg, to prove, to overgive, to shrink, to take blame just to keep the peace. But plot twist, that version of you doesn't exist anymore. You didn't just change, chosen one. You upgraded. You evolved past the version they trained themselves to manipulate. And the moment you stopped showing up to play the part they rehearsed for you, their entire playbook caught fire. Picture this. They walked into a chess game with your old moves memorized, only to realize you're not even playing chess anymore. You're on an entirely different board, with different rules, different pieces, and a mindset they never prepared for. That's why they spiral. That's why they gossip. That's why they cling to old stories of who you were, because it's the only version of you they understand. They can't navigate who you've become. They can't predict you. They can't read you. And to someone who manipulates through predictability, that is a total collapse of power. Now they talk, because talking is the only place where they can still pretend they have access to you. They rewrite your past, because they can't handle your present. They recreate a version of you they can manage in conversations, in rumors, in backhanded comments. Because facing the real you, the one with boundaries, clarity, and emotional strength, would mean admitting they have no idea how to reach you anymore. You outgrew the version of yourself that they depended on to feel superior. Chosen ones, let this land deep. You do not owe anyone the old you just because they memorized how to manipulate it. That outdated model is gone, retired, archived, and they can't handle the upgrade. Let them analyze a past version of you while you continue building a future they'll never be part of. Let them gossip in circles while you move in straight lines. They're loud because they're lost. You're quiet because you're done performing, and that right there is why they can't stop talking. Number 10. Your presence became the mirror that forced their disguises to fall apart. You became the mirror they never wanted to stand in front of, the kind that doesn't blur, soften, or flatter. You didn't crack their mask. Your presence simply made it transparent. They weren't destroyed by you, chosen one. They were destroyed by the parts of themselves they could no longer hide when you stepped into the room. You didn't expose anyone. You didn't call them out, raise your voice, or throw their secrets in their face. All you did was show up real, grounded, aware, whole. And that alone was enough to send people who built their identity on performance into an emotional freefall. You brought clarity into spaces where people were addicted to illusion. And clarity, my dear chosen one, is lethal to those who survive on lies. You became the silent truth in a room full of people who preferred comfortable stories over uncomfortable reality. You were the reflection they spent years avoiding, the reflection they prayed no one else would ever see. That's why they couldn't handle you. You didn't trigger them. Their own unprocessed truth did. Imagine someone who has gone their entire life avoiding mirrors because deep down they know they won't like what they see. Then suddenly you walk in, calm, steady, whole, and without saying a word, you become the mirror they can't escape. All the envy they buried, all the insecurity they pretended didn't exist, all the fake confidence they stitched together, it rises to the surface instantly, screaming louder than anything you could ever say. And because they can't hide from that reflection, they attack it. Not because you're cruel, but because they can't stand how clearly you make their internal chaos show. They talk about you, not because you're the villain, but because your existence threatens the stories they've crafted about themselves. You remind them of the gap between who they pretend to be and who they actually are. And that gap burns, it humiliates, it destabilizes. So instead of facing themselves, they try to distort the mirror. They twist your name in conversations, hoping others see you the way they need to see you, through a lens blurry enough to protect their fragile identity. But here's the truth, chosen one. Every rumor they spread is really a distraction from the reflection you awakened in them. They're not running from you. They're running from themselves. The discomfort you ignite isn't personal. It's psychological. You don't shatter illusions by attacking them. You shatter illusions simply by standing in your truth. That's what makes you dangerous. You don't need to defend yourself or expose anyone. Your authenticity alone breaks every false narrative they try to build. And it's precisely because of this that they can't stop talking. You are the living reminder of what's real, what's grounded, what's unshakable. You're the example of what they could be if they stopped performing and started healing. But until they choose to face themselves, they will keep projecting, keep spiraling, and keep trying to smear the mirror instead of cleaning their reflection. Let them talk, let them twist, let them hide behind noise. Because every time they speak your name, chosen one, they reveal exactly what they fear, and your silence. It keeps reminding them who they really are and who they're not. And now, chosen ones, as everything comes full circle, understand this. You were never the problem. You were the clarity that exposed every illusion around you. Their reactions were never a reflection of your worth, only of their fear. Walk forward knowing your presence alone shifts entire rooms. If this message hit where it needed to, show your strength. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop 77 in the comments so I know you're one of the real ones tuned in. Share this with another chosen one who needs the reminder. Our movement grows because of you.